All right. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I will now call this work session of the Tigard-Tualatin School Board to order at 5 p.m. So again, I know it's, every time of year is sort of a busy time of year, but this isn't a particularly busy time of year. So I really appreciate everyone being here as we sort of revisit, but also move forward on this pay to play sort of topic and this just sort of conversation. And I know that there have been iterations of this conversation for the last couple of years, and there's been a lot of really helpful information that has come forward and a lot of great data from both high schools that have really helped continue to inform this conversation. And what I'm hoping to do is really get down the next steps and truly move forward, not just kind of in circles, but really what is that next step and what are we looking at, and then kind of thinking about numbers and going from there. And we will do a brief sort of overview of some numbers and really get a good idea sort of financially what the implications are and potential impacts and how that would also be invested and helped in our high school communities. So a couple of things. The last year of the pay to play for this school district was the 2019-2020 school year. And really with the help of a lot of students, which is why I'm glad we have our reps here today, it was really brought to the forefront by a lot of students at that time that the concern was that the pay-to-play fees were creating a barrier for students to participate in extracurricular activities. And so by removing that barrier, we would have really kind of looking more sort of globally in terms of our high schools, more students participating. And so what came to light 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, was that when we took those pay-to-play fees away, the needle did not move in terms of who was participating in extracurricular activities. And so that really got us in this sort of really thoughtful, but kind of a rabbit hole discussion of what are the barriers, why isn't that working, what else can we do? And so that's kind of where we are now. And so what we, last year, and I know that we'll have other folks speaking to some of this, but I think what we realized is that even as most recently as last year, when we met numerous times, the data stayed the same in that there was no significant change to the number of students playing or accessing athletics or other extracurricular activities in terms of, and particularly when you're looking at the demographics of those who are using or accessing the pay to play. So I think what we really want to look at today is we're going to get some updates in terms of the financial piece of this, really like what are the numbers, what do they look like, what were we getting in pay to play fees, what are the increased costs that high schools are seeing now, which has been something that we haven't talked a ton about, but is like a very stark reality, is that there are a lot of things that cost more, that rules have changed, and so we're paying for things that we weren't paying for in 2019, 2020. And then really get some clear perspective of our ADs that are here, principals, students, and kind of when we revisit this conversation around reinstating those fees, because that's feels like a weird thing to do. And also, I think what we'll hear is that there's a way to do that is both honoring of that initial hope of eliminating barriers, while also making sure that we have enough teams, we have enough coaches, we have enough sports to offer for these students, and what are those other barriers that we can look to eliminate, so that we're really getting at the piece that was the intent of this in the first place. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so now I'm going to pass it off to, I believe, Director C for some financial goodies.
Sure. So specifically, we were looking at the amount of high school athletic expenses which are currently exceeding allocated budget. Specifically, in recent years, there's been more demands in terms of operational costs. There's just regular inflation plus additional needs for safety protocols. In certain sports, the number of officials have increased, and then another driver can be transportation. So specifically for just kind of taking a step back, the last year the school district assessed fees for athletics was in the school year 2018-19, and approximately $275,000 was collected among high school student athletes. Last year, we, of course, this is the third year where we didn't charge fees, and the discretionary athletic budget or costs exceeded budget by about $151,000. So due to those factors I mentioned just a little bit ago. So we've been looking at if we were to implement a new fee, if we looked at the prior year payment rate, which indicates that in the past about 60% of assessed fees were paid, either because of students seeking scholarships or the district using a discount program to help multi-athlete students and also families who have multiple athletes. We were able to see that about 60% of fees assessed were paid. And so just as we were reverse engineering into what would be needed to bridge the budget gap, we were looking at about $145 per athlete per sport to pay for the 25-26 school year.
And just to clarify, that's bridging the gap of the difference between the expense of operational costs for athletics and what we budgeted for athletics, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so and then just to make sure I heard you correctly, when we last had athletic fees or pay to play, it was about $275,000 that we collected.
Yeah, and we used the 2018-19 year as
Right.
the
last full year.
benchmark because that was the year prior to COVID.
Correct. And so, and the fees then were about $275 per sport with a $700 cap. Is that correct?
$225.
$225.
$700 cap.
$225.
Families.
Perfect. Okay, got it. Thank you.
I have a quick question. That $145 per student you mentioned, is that per every student competing, or is that for the 60% who would be paying their fees?
So that number is derived of assuming a 60% payment rate. So we look at about 1,912 student athletes among the 3 seasons at both high schools, and then a 60% collection rate. So it, yeah.
Is there any questions?
Thanks. I have a couple questions. So when we say the needle didn't move, we also had more no-cut slots in some of the sports, like larger JV offerings. Didn't we have an increase in participation? So was there a change in the number of students, but the demographics of the students participating didn't change at all? Is that right?
So Tori last year brought in her slide presentation, I think Pedro did too. That, and actually Brian Bailey the year before when we kind of first looked at this data and sort of assessed it, that was really the first year that it was sort of like the numbers in terms of those demographic pieces sort of stayed the same, and or at least didn't make the significant I'm sure there were obviously changes. There wasn't the expected change in terms of participation that I think we thought there was going to be once we eliminated those fees. And so that was sort of, now the ways, I think there's some other things too in terms of the ability and the ease in which students can apply for scholarships has changed and become way better. There's still some, I think transportation has gotten better. There's still areas to improve there. So I think there are some other things that have also shifted and improved alongside that, the fees being eliminated. But I think it was really kind of looking at the surprise that it didn't increase in the way that I think the folks, well, I was at that table, but we thought it was going to.
And just for some context, in this fall, so fall of 24-25, there's 396 participants in fall athletics at Tigard High School. And I'm using this as a comparison. In Tigard High School, back in 2019, 2020, in the fall, so this is pre-COVID, it was 387 athletes. And so we're looking at a difference of 10. And it's been pretty consistent for the last 5 years. For Tualatin High School, spring had a little bit of an increase last year, but for the most part, it's been fairly consistent as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's the clarifying that I was going to share also was when we look comparable to 18-19, then total participation has not really changed per season. And when we look at the demographic comparison, it's roughly the same.
And so the good news is that students aren't having to pay out of pocket to participate, but the challenge is we're not seeing the types of increases in participation, especially demographically, that we hope to see. And so I think the one thing that we wanted to do in this space was hear from our partners from both high schools to share a little bit more around what are you seeing in the world of athletics that is changed in the last 5 years, and also what could we possibly do to look at other mechanisms to boost that participation or increase more diverse participation in athletics.
Hi, my name is Ted Rose, Athletic Director at Tualatin High School. A few things, going into the athletic piece of it is that from my past experience and past practices here in this district, we've always had a waiver process available for kids. Access has never been an issue. The pay-to-play fees helped our operating cost, for the athletic budget at the district level. I think it's important to start having a lens on balancing the budget. When you look at expenses and how things have gone over the years, increased cost all across the board, whether it's league dues, officials, tournaments. Leagues are getting smaller, the 6A, so you're having to travel out of state, you're having to play those types of games. And these are things, a third official in basketball, a shot clock operator. And these are all things that really we don't anticipate as time goes along. They just kind of, every year, there might be a new state association rule that comes in and it's like, whoop, we got to do that. And so for us in our district, I feel that we are over budget every year in the athletic department. We do a lot of fundraising in our districts. We really make our coaches do a lot of fundraising for additional coaches, and some of the things that we don't really look at that maybe I might look at just coming from the chair that I'm sitting in is girls and boys basketball. How many coaches do you have at the varsity level, JV level, freshman level? Are we apples to apples with every school in the Three Rivers League as far as coaches, or are we one less coach at that level? These are things that we have to look at. I think on the athletic budget part of it in the Three Rivers League, which I like to, obviously do some comparison analysis because that is our competition. We're the lowest athletic budget in the conference. And, from my lens, I think we should be the top athletic budget in the conference. And so I think, we want our kids to have all the access and all the great things that come along with activities. And we want to equip our coaches with that too. So, I think with the pay-to-play situation, I think it's more of balancing the budget. That's how I look at it. And then once you're able to balance the budget, then you're able to obviously make some increases, as needed as time has changed with unified sports at Tualatin High School has really grown, and we finance that. We shouldn't have to go to our athletic booster club at Tualatin High School to help supplement that. You know, I'm very fortunate at our institution that we have a very involved parent athletic booster club. And, you know, they help supplement a lot for our kids. And so I just think for us, everyone else in the Three Rivers League is currently charging a fee. And I'm just looking at a district level of balancing the budget.
Can I just add one point? I think the only thing I might add is the waiver process and how that's changed. You know, prior to COVID, that was really sort of, it perhaps made students feel uncomfortable. In fact, we know it did because they told us it did. Through that process of having to talk to a coach, you know, get this waiver form turned in. Now it's all done electronically, and it literally could be a button. There doesn't need to be an awkward conversation. In fact, we have our athletic equity coordinators help bridge the recruiting in the hallways of the school and do those pieces. That online registration form can be done without creating any kind of awkward conversation for students.
Ted's pretty eloquent, so there's not a whole lot to add to some of the things that he shared because we experience exactly the same things. I think maybe just for some clarification and some understanding is, you know, the Three Rivers League, when we lose a participating school and our league dues, it doesn't change the fact that we're still going to host a league championship with one less school. So the cost is still there to run all of our fall championships, winter championships, and spring championships without a team that was contributing to the league and also helping generate revenue for the league too. So we've seen our league dues go up. We've already talked about our officials and all of those things.
And an example of that would be Canby went from 6A to 5A, and they were in our division. Well, somebody has to absorb those costs for district championships at the track and field level, cross country, those types of things. So now you're one less school within your conference. And so those are all the little things that add up at the end of the year when you try to balance your budget, right?
For us, that was an $8,000 difference per year per school.
Well, and it makes me think also, comparing the amount we're spending on our athletics compared to other schools. A competitive program also brings in families and students, and that also brings in revenue, which helps the system as a whole.
So I heard you say that we are the only district in Three Rivers that does not have a pay-to-play fee. My other wondering is, I know that there were at least 2 other districts in the state that eliminated pay-to-play at about the same time we did. Are you aware of any districts that have reinstated pay-to-play, that they've had difficulties in their leagues? Does anybody know that? Is that a data point we could get?
I don't know, but we can find out.
I think it was Medford was one.
Salem Kaiser eliminated pay to play in 2020, and so I can look into it.
Okay, thank you.
I would just want to add one other contextual piece, I think, to this conversation. We can move forward in terms of, I think Director Rose brought this up too, with other fundraising. Not only are coaches responsible for doing that, but it's just packaging pay to play in a different way, in a sense, because it's sort of like, and I know this having an athlete, like every student needs to find $200 in banner sponsors or friends and family. So I'm getting the text, I was joking about this with somebody, from all my daughter's friends, like 7 come in on volleyball night, like, you know, this much for, you know, each student. And I appreciate that, and they also do many other things, but I think just to kind of reframe, families are still having that ask, and while no kid is gonna not be on a team if they don't bring in that, it still is sort of, in a way, sort of saying, this is what it costs for you to play the sport. It's not as required, but students really also feel that ownership and desire to kind of participate in that way to help earn that money for their sports. And so I think that's just another layer to this where it's still there. It's just packaged a little bit differently. Do we want to?
It might be nice to hear from some of the students. Yeah. So, and some of the things we want to hear is what are some of the things that we should be taking into consideration when reviewing pay to play?
My opinion is that I did not know. Thank you for the number that we were the only one in the Three Rivers League that didn't have this. And I think of what can we compare this to? Compare it to the lunch program. Most students pay for their own lunch, but there's a program where you can get it for free. I feel like if we did that you could apply for it instead of just no student pays at all, then it would raise the numbers of money coming in to the budget, but at the same time wouldn't discourage anyone from playing with money being a barrier.
I agree with Jamie in his sort of logic on how we should apply an application, I guess, for these waivers. But I also think as an athlete at Tualatin High School, a lot, I guess I play tennis, and we don't really get the wide range of uniforms and gears that a lot of the other schools in the three river leagues get. We get a t-shirt and then everything else we have to get ourselves. And I think with the pay to play or just a raise in budget would allow for more kind of gear and uniforms to be provided to all the players so that we don't have to go and purchase 3 pairs of shorts every year or a new pair of shoes every single time we are joining the team. So I think, in my opinion, it's something that's needed.
So my perspective is really of a student who's never really been interested in sports. I've never played a sport personally, but for me, I didn't even know that there was a no pay to play kind of program. I didn't even know that for me personally. But my brothers did play sports. My oldest brother played track, and my other brother played basketball. So understanding their perspectives, it's more about for me in my family, it's about culture. My parents were so afraid for me to play a sport because they were terrified that I'd get hurt, just like how my brothers did. And but I also understand that in a sense at Tigard High School, I know a lot of Asian students play tennis, and that may be due to the fact that one of the coaches is also Asian as well. And so that really helps to really bring a lot of Asian students together. And I think that's kind of where I'm going at a perspective of trying to maybe ease the fears of families, maybe trying to a way to connect culture into a way to feel comfortable to play. So that's kind of my perspective for me personally.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Advisor Tran. So are you thinking that maybe one way to increase more diverse participation is doing some outreach and awareness to families that maybe have some concerns or fears over bringing students participating and getting hurt?
I think that's a good idea, but there's also sometimes I feel like it's also hard for me to get some information as well. Maybe it's also because I'm not listening half the time. In a sense, yes. Um, as in I know there's a weekly newsletter that's sent out, and thankfully I read it sometimes, but I know that maybe not a lot of students read that newsletter, and that could be a lot of information. So if I don't really just right out of the moment, I can't think of something that could really go towards students that says hey, here's this program that's happening, here's what's happening. But definitely I feel like outreach is a good idea.
Do you feel like and then I'll stop pestering you with questions. Do you feel like if somebody like you who hasn't participated in athletics, if someone went to you and said, hey, you should try tennis at Tigard, it's not a cut sport, so you would be on the team and it's a good way to meet people and get good physical activity, and would that have made you more interested if you had more awareness about that and that it didn't cost money?
I think possibly, but it also has to go into the fact that sports do take a lot of time as well. I have to take into that perspective personally as a student. But if there was possibly a way that I could just do it for fun, I know there's recreational as well sports, but it's also I feel it still feels awkward because I've never played a sport. So it's like I'm now entering into this new world. How is this gonna be managed and all this? Even though my parents, have done it with my brothers, it's been a while since they're often away. So it's kind of like them trying to revisit into that world of sports, and I'm not sure if they understand that as well.
Thank you very much. Director Moss?
Sort
Moss?
of piggybacking off of Nathan with outreach. When I was younger, I played like in the little leagues and stuff, like specifically soccer. And I feel like I'm not sure with the high schools what they do, but like being able to partner with like the little leagues and being like, hey, like this is what we do at the high school, to sort of show off and be like, this is what we do. Like you can be a part of it when you enter high school. Because I feel like something that might motivate kids to do sports in high school. I also have a couple of questions if I'm able to ask them. So I know that water polo isn't in OSAA, so does that work within the budget of pay to play?
Water polo's been grandfathered in at Tualatin High School because it was one of the original sports when the school opened up. So we treat it as a OSAA sanctioned sport.
Same thing for Tigard. Okay. And then what about sports that are technically clubs, like lacrosse, ski, snowboarding? Like I know that they have to pay out of pocket, but do they get funds from the pay to play?
They do not, but they work within separate organizations. So lacrosse will have their own club in which they can go in and sign up. So I don't know how their organizations work. At the high school level, I think with the snowboard aspect of it, they do use that funding to help fund that program in snowboard.
Yeah, I would say not yet. That's not something. That's not the move that we've made with those club sports yet. Lacrosse in particular, they have their own board. Their organization does raise money and they have funds for them, but there are fees for our club sports. If that answers the question, that each of those sports have their own fees. Yes.
Thank you. And then, sorry, one more question. For the boys volleyball, it got approved by OSAA last school year to be an actual sport. Does TTSD or Tiger High or Tualatin High plan on having that as a sport?
It all depends on the number of signups. And so, prior to going into that season, if enough kids can come together and have a team, then you put the team together and you apply through the OSA. And same thing with girls flag football, which is starting to be an emerging sport across the state too. To kind of go back to what you had talked about before with lacrosse, snowboard, at Tualatin High School, our athletic booster club, the Packbackers, they also support those club sports.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would say a clarification on that is that boys volleyball is an emerging sport, so not a fully sanctioned sport. Same with girls flag football. We do know that we've got enough interest at Tigard to have a program in the spring, and ultimately with that, that would also come with fees for them too.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
So I just want to capture our student feedback really quick in the notes that I took, because I think it actually, almost every single person touched on another, like part of this conversation is what are the other barriers, because we didn't hit the one, the lever wasn't quite right. I think it was a helpful one to kind of see some other information, but it wasn't the one that we thought was going to really change the landscape like we thought it was. And so certainly to your point, and Sky, a little bit yours as well, the waiver program has been and will continue to be in place and easy as it is. I do think your point, and I think what was brought up last year, is gear. is a barrier. And so that's another thing that we can kind of be thinking about in this conversation. I really appreciated the conversation around kind of what you touched on was representation, right? In coaching. And then I loved how you just said how do we connect cultures? And so I wrote that down as just another piece of in this barriers discussion that we'll keep moving forward, sort of how we look at that. And then a little bit when you were talking about connecting littles with high schoolers also, and this is my shameless plug, middle school sports, which will be another sort of arm of this conversation at a later date, I think kind of bridges some of that. And we've seen really good numbers at Tualatin for a couple of the programs that they've started that with. And so I think all of you have really touched on sort of the heart of this conversation and then potentially what we could address in terms of those barriers with potentially bringing back some type of pay to play and sort of, and continuing to see how we can get kiddos involved at the level and in the way that they want to.
I think so these are all really good points. I just wanted to add, thinking about how we're problem solving on this, I feel like there might be an opportunity to make the discussion a little bit more broad, because some students are interested in just other activities, right? So the idea is basically that young people that are connected with their school, with their community, they're doing positive activities, are going to be doing better and benefiting from those activities. But it's not just sports. So you might have a lot of young people doing theater or dance or volunteering or serving on student government or on our school board. So we have all these other activities, and so we might have some communities more interested in one activity or another. I don't think we want to have the opportunity for everyone, but then I don't think we should value one preferred activity over another. So if a young person's engaged in something and it's working, I don't think we should go recruit them to the football team necessarily, right? So like not all the activities are going to be for everyone. There's more than one way to be involved. So when we're having these discussions, we might want to look at if there's a barrier, then that's an issue. But if it's a preference, then it may not be. So maybe someone's getting engaged a different way. Maybe we don't want to put a value on that if that's working and that's a strength.
This is like a question and kind of just a statement, but obviously, I'm sure all the students can agree that there are some sports that are more funded than others, and so I was just curious and wondering if students did have to start paying fees for participating in sports, is there a way that the students can also understand that like these fees are going to be like distributed to all sports instead of just like football gets new gear but dance doesn't, or etc.
Sky brought up a really good point. I think the area that Sky's hitting on that really resonates with me a little bit is the fact that there is no discretionary fund within the athletic budget. So Sky's a tennis player. Her team doesn't get a start with 12 dozen tennis balls. Softball doesn't get 12 dozen softballs, and baseball doesn't get 12 dozen baseballs to start a season. Basketball, soccer, they have to fundraise and go out and get their own equipment. So I think on a small scale, it's kind of a little bit what Sky's talking about is as the season comes, they have all these needs they kind of need. Where can we kind of help spell check it? And right away it'd be equipment, would be me. The other stuff, the sweatshirts and the uniforms, those all come with planning from the coaches in the program far out in advance, right? But I do think, Sky's kind of talked about a point that, I think is important. I think across the Three Rivers League from the other athletic directors that I've spoken to, you know, does your softball get 10 dozen softballs to start the year? Yes, they do. You know, and those are things that, you know, we're all trying to improve our areas and our districts. And I think for us, I think it's time that we, you know, really see what the impact of pay to play is going to be. Is going to balance the budget? And are there other ways that we can look at it? Or do we need to go to ticket sales and look at football and basketball and maybe apply some of those funds towards lessening the fee? Do we want to look at ASB? Because that does allow you to go to games for free because you do pay for tickets. So I think there's many ways you can look at this in many angles. And I think as this group is here, I think we really got to, you know, figure out a way to get ourselves at an equal playing field across the Three Rivers League.
Ted, do you happen to know what the fees are in the other districts in that league?
Ted has that, but can I add one more point to what he's saying? Because Crystal broadened the conversation. I think it's important to note a few things. Like, you know, Melissa can probably speak to this too at Tigard, but we've even had to shrink down our ASB options because of changing of the fees to ASB fees and the decrease in sales for ASB stickers since 2020. We've had to cut a lot of things out of activities that we used to do. We used to do a school shirt every single year for every single kid. We used to do school planners for every single kid. Those are things that we can't afford anymore. So, and we don't charge fees in band. We don't charge fees in dance, like anything. We don't charge fees in those other sports. And so, to Sky's point, it falls upon individual coaches to fundraise either for an additional coach or for uniforms. And some coaches do more than others. And some bigger teams have easier time drawing more money. But all it's done is pass that cost on elsewhere in the system, but it's not just athletics we're talking about. The impact has been across the activities too.
I do have those numbers. Do you want me to share all of them with you, or would you like me to send it down to you?
If you could just give me a range.
Okay. I'll just do per sport. How about that? Not the second sport, not the third sport, all that. Lake Oswego School District, $330 per sport. West Lynn, $325 per sport. Oregon City, $200 per sport. St. Mary's, $200 per sport. Newburgh, $200 per sport. Hillsboro, $200 per sport. McMinnville, $180 per sport. And Forest Grove, $125 per sport.
Thank
And I just real quick, I have an answer to the schools that brought back pay to play. Salem did bring it back last year.
The only thing I would add is to build on what Michael was saying, that, and Sky, you as well, that it isn't that we don't have the costs anymore. It's that we have shifted the costs to other places in our system, including our families. So it isn't that they don't need tennis gear to compete in competitions anymore. It's that as a family who's participating, I am now personally responsible for purchasing the things so that students can participate. And so I do agree with what Ted's saying too, that we as a collective have to figure out that it's on us. We have to make sure that kids can play once they sign up. Like, one part of the challenge was getting students to sign up and participate. We all have the numbers and see that that isn't yet happening, but also what we're doing simultaneously is putting an additional burden on those students and families who are choosing to participate across the system, not just in athletics. It's happening in theater, it's happening in choir, it's happening across our system, and I feel like we have a responsibility to figure out how to continue to lessen that burden across the system.
Yeah, I think that was what I was going to share too, is that there's also potential there to, in essence, level the playing field across sports, because some programs just have the ability to fundraise a lot, have a stronger mechanism to fundraise. So when we're talking about fees across sports and it goes into discretionary, then we can adjust those to programs that need the support just a little bit more, and that becomes an equity move there.
Really appreciate the context of what other districts are doing. That's helpful to think about. Hyper-specific question. I think I understood what you were saying, that the to close that operational gap, it would look like $145 per sport. Is that right? So I think what you said when we last did this, there was also a $700 cap. Would there be, like, has there been any calculation? Would we anticipate another cap if we went back to pay to play? And has there been any thought about what that might be, or not yet?
Yeah, I think to clarify, the $145 was backing in, like, assuming every student would be charged and paid. So we would actually probably need to incrementally increase that, assuming the free and reduced waiver and discount. So it wouldn't be a straight 145. And the second question was,
Would we anticipate a cap like we had?
I think we would. I can't speak for the group, but I think the multi-sport discounts and the family caps would be part of the equation for sure. Super.
And
go ahead. I was just going to say that, some of the pre-conversations around this has not come. I mean, I think our board discussion work now is really like whittling down all of this to what would that potentially look like. And it might not be a 1 year fully solved issue. Like, I have thoughts and first thoughts around that as well, just kind of also easing our families into this in a really thoughtful way as well. And I also, to Director Weston's point, which I think is really true, and we've had Katie McKee here in the past to kind of have that perspective. And I was a music person, so I was not involved in any of this at the high school level, but we also, so it's different. It always felt like we didn't have as much attention. We also didn't have to pay to be in band and orchestra and all of the things. Now, marching band was slightly different, and I know that drumline is a little bit different in some schools. So there are some caveats to that, but I think the pay-to-play conversation, when it initiated in 2019, was around the pay-to-play that's in place for sports, and so that's sort of been the progression of this conversation. And also, I think we need to make sure in those broader, not for today conversations around funding, are those other extracurriculars also being funded? Do they have all the supports as well, so they don't have to do a grant for their piece? They really have that same funding at their disposal. Yeah.
The other thought I've been having, and I've had this conversation with several folks around the other ways we can leverage other organizations. And so if the goal of this thing was to get more kids participating, and it didn't play out in the data that way, and I know we've talked about middle school, I think it also is worth a conversation around how we leverage organizations that we allow to use our facilities. I'll give just an example. So there's a youth organization that uses our facility regularly, and I just did a test with myself and said, I'm going to look on a website. How is it easy for me to find a waiver process for this youth organization to not have to pay the $300 fee that it costs for that fall season sport? And it was literally buried at the bottom of a page that if you needed to click to the 4 pages before that and I hit that waiver form, that I could find that organization's possibility. But we could create a set of standards that there's a lot of organizations that want to use our facilities, and we could say, fine, you have priority to sign up for our facilities if you meet these 4 or 5 or 6 standards that we set that make athletics more accessible for students in the elementary ages before they're too far behind in tennis, or they've never tried track before, or they've never picked up a golf club, or whatever it is that we allow our facilities to be used for, baseball, all those sports where we were hoping to see more participation and didn't because they don't have the skill set at a younger age. I think that is like a pretty cheap, cost-effective way of keeping our partners accountable to.
And I like the Zinnia real quick, and Director Weston, but I like the different, grading these different sort of ways to both increase participation and sort of potentially, on another hand, solve some of the funding issues.
Yeah, just a few things. I think some of these things kind of feed on themselves. You invest money, you have a nicer facility, people come out to watch the sport. It makes fundraising easier. You can charge tickets and sell snacks. Whereas if you don't have any funding, it's not competitive. You don't bring in students into the district. The gear's not purchased at a discount. And a lot of families will end up paying for private lessons, which are going to cost more than if it had gone through the school. Another thing about, so I think kind of there's sort of no free thing here. It's just kind of moving around and it's not always really saving money for people. Another thing, I'm not sure some of the margins on the club sports as it is. They're expensive, but I think the tournaments might be, I mean, if you ask anyone, I don't think they're going to have very much money right now, or generally, but I mean, it might be one way to bring in more revenue.
Board Chair, you brought this up, but I just want to clarify. $145 that we backed into only covers the deficit spending. So these things about getting equipment for the start of the school year or more uniforms and things like that, that's not the number then.
Can I
So
add?
I'm wondering about, I'm sorry, go ahead, Zenia, you were next.
No, do you want to finish your thought?
No, I'm going in.
Yeah, because I think also with what all students have shared, I want to go back and contextualize a lot of this question. I think it's about what problem are we trying to solve here. And I think when we first brought up the conversation, this is an important lesson learned as an organization to say, what's all of the information that we need to have to make a decision to move forward. And I think one of the things that came up was, and just an observer of this process, it made me wonder around, are we talking about this one thing that's going to solve this problem? Or are we talking about all the interconnected things that we need to really understand and explore? Are the numbers tell us kind of where the gaps are, where we need to focus, but the information that you saw in lessons learned are all the things that go into whether or not the things that we're trying to do are getting towards where we want to be. As Ted shared, the conversation about pay to play is really right now around balancing the budget. And so if that is what pay to play is doing, what are the other things that we need to talk about? And Nathan talked a little bit about a lot of the things that we've learned and also applied into our system. Because of this work, we now have athletic equity coordinators that does some of the outreach that you're talking about. So if those are the things that we can build off of, I think that's something to think through too, because there's not going to be one answer that's going to solve this problem. And so my recommendation is taking a look at all the lessons learned that we've gathered along the way, and how do we build a more comprehensive way. And I think that goes back to what Principal Barron had shared earlier around, it's our responsibility to kind of look through all those pieces to be able to make this happen for students.
I just want to add to that to make sure everyone knows, in part of that conversation and lessons learned is around middle school. So this year there's a visioning process happening to say what should it look like in partnership with youth sports, et cetera. So that vision process is happening, will be happening with both athletic directors being involved in that as well. So I just want to +1 on the, I think it's a broader conversation, and we're probably being too short-sighted if we only try to solve the pay-to-play angle of it.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is about 15 years ago, when my own daughter was in high school, we charged for every elective class. There was a $25 fee for every art class, for every music class, for every foreign language class. There was a textbook fee. And so you would go on the first day of school and you would I spent about $150 for my daughter just to attend public school. And that was a fee that the board decided quite a long time ago was inappropriate, that free and public education should be, in fact, free. So when I hear you talking about lessons learned, I'm thinking back to that time and how did we go about the process of eliminating that fee and absorbing it through the system such that we never had to have the conversation about bringing it back. And I realized that there are very few people left in the room, and I'm looking at Darren like, there's one, who were principals at that time who could maybe think about how we did that work back then. I don't know if that's possible.
The fact is, though, that the other schools are charging the fee. So it didn't change who was participating, and it's put us at a competitive disadvantage, which is also, and it's also taking away from the ability to offer a wealth of activities that our diverse students are participating in at various levels. So I feel like from that perspective, it makes sense to just bring it back because it didn't accomplish what it did, and it had a harm potentially of reducing what we were offering. So that's not the intended outcome. And if we have fewer activities, then that's going to be felt by all of our students, whether they participate in sports or something else. If the something else got cut, then that's a problem too.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think one of the things we need to look at is, so this lever didn't work, didn't do what we wanted to do, so what's the lever? And so I like the middle school sports idea. Let's try that. Let's try the other aspects, the fundraising aspect. Is that what's getting in the way?
And then I'd add, then if we can be somewhat, try to be predictable, because it's like squeezing a balloon, right? So you ask about fees and stuff. So we eliminated those fees. Those fees were then absorbed by discretionary budgets within the building. And then the departments then asked for, our department now needed $3,000 more in their discretionary budget. So it's just kind of, it's shifting the dollar and where it comes from, but it was still a stress on the program. And just to clarify, we're talking about discretionary right now for athletics. What's not included in that is the salaries, coaching stipends, all the things that go along with sports too. Those have an annual increase in cost as well. So this is just really that discretionary hole that we're trying to fill.
I'm going to go into a little bit of the coaching standpoint for a minute. When coaches come in, they're here to coach our kids, work with our kids. And when you start adding on that layer of, you got to be a really good fundraiser too. And it becomes really difficult. Some people are really good at doing it and enjoy doing it, and some could do without it. And because it does kind of create a little anxiety, amongst kids and coaches to do those types of things. I think as we get ready to wind down today, I really start thinking we start looking at some bullets, on pay to play. The things that I wrote down would be ticket sales. We should look at that. If you look at pay to play, does some of that go right back to that particular program, which would really alleviate a lot, whether it's having that additional club coach that they're going to have to fundraise $4,000 or $5,000 for that one coach, for an additional coach. Do we look at the ASB? So I think we need to start, putting some things in there and saying, okay, can we do this here? Is this going to help us out? Is it going to take anything away from that program? And if it's not, then it should be something that we should look at.
This might be for Sarah a little bit, but I believe, Ted can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that in our last meeting, our other TRL schools are in discussion and raising ticket sales. So I think we understand the role of it and how you use it, but I don't think that the adult and student cost of tickets has moved very much for a while. And as the cost of things rise, that maybe that's a place that can help a little bit. I'm sure that you'll say that it's not a huge piece of the puzzle, but I believe that our other TRL schools are starting to take a look at whether or not they need to raise the ticket sales prices.
I really like your idea of the having part of the fee going back to the individual sport in a discretionary fund. Do you have a number in your mind of like what percentage that would be functional?
Well, first I'd like to pay my overtures per year, which I'm over every year significantly. You know, we just take care of it, right? We do what we do for kids, and so do the coaches. Do I have a specific number or maybe what that looks like? No, but let's say for all the incoming freshmen, maybe we only take the ninth grade pay to play and contribute that back to that program, so it allows them to maybe get off to the start that they need to get off to as far as equipment, because you don't know the number of kids that are coming in, right? And you don't know if you're going to have one or two teams at the lower level. You could have a freshman team, you could have a JV2 team. And so if we have a second team at the lower level, those coaches have to go out and fundraise for that coach. They got to fundraise for that official, and they got to fundraise for those buses. And so, you know, these are just things that, you know, you could look at. I think, you know, we'll leave it up to, you know, our superintendent on how he wants to balance, you know, that part of the budget, you know, at the district level, because ultimately it's really at the district level. We're just here to give our insight on some of the things that we see at both schools, and you know, I've always appreciated this district. Great support, especially parent support. Fantastic. You know, we have a super organization in the Packpackers, and I'm very thankful for that. I just think on the kids' end of it and the coaching end of it, we could not carry the cost over, as Melissa was talking about. I think there's just better ways to balance that budget.
Jessica, don't throw anything at me, but I'm just wondering if this might be an opportunity in the bigger picture to look at and audit all the fees that happen in our district. Again, I just worry if we focus too much just on this. I've heard us say like we want to be a fee-free district, et cetera. We still have families that pay for elementary school supplies. Folks know I always bring that up. But is that right? Like, do we want to make sure all academic things are covered? And then we have, like, what's our priority order in ensuring fees are covered for families and students? So it may just be a good opportunity. I don't know that we even know all the little fees out there that are being charged. And if this is an opportunity to look at it as a broader system and then make some priority decisions around where we do want to charge, where we don't, why or why not.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar just around and kind of bring it back to also, you know, I think clearly there's a need for something to change. And I think the reason why, and we continue to have these really robust discussions, is also because we have recognized that it is not this super in a silo question and answer, kind of to Zinnia's point, where this thing that didn't sort of work the way we thought really brought to light a multitude of other things. And so while we can kind of focus on this particular little piece, we also then, when we know better, we do better, kind of have to continue looking at all those other systems and fees and structures that are in place to not deal with this one, which is why I think moving forward for the board, you know, what would we want to see in terms of, you know, if we're looking at just this problem that we're going to solve, you know, what would that look like? And then continue to have all of the other conversations that are kind of outside of that particular scope. And for me, it was really important because this was brought forward from students. It was incredibly important that if we're bringing these back, that we have that student perspective, so that it doesn't feel like students did this really incredible work and had this change, and then adults changed it, right? And so I appreciate all of the other perspectives and thoughts that you guys have brought forward as well to continue to think about in those other problems that we need to continue to problem solve together. So that was, again, one of the reasons why I think while these are long and they always feel like a little circular, like where are we now at 5:59? But I think we're, you know, my hope is that, you know, between the board and the district, we can really come up with the bullet points to Ted's point of like, what would it look like if we do this, and then bring that proposal forward, and then we have something sort of tangible to look at.
I would just like to add two little things. When the students met originally when this came up, they knew that this wasn't going to solve the problem. They'd said it. It was like, let's try this and see what happens. participants. And so now, because we didn't have the data, so that I think they'll now get to see the data and we can look at that. And then two, my request is, I think it would be great if the ADs could look at what's a basic, optimal, and adequate budget. So we can see what, if you had X, Y, Z, what would that dollar amount be? For you guys to look by sport, that would be really helpful then to use at the district level to look at those numbers.
Perhaps also a stair-stepped sort of like, in my mind, like a two-digit number, if it's $99, whatever it is, like that first, like how are we going to roll this out? And then if we need to, without also feel like there's changes every year, nickel and diming, but also kind of like if this is a 5-year plan to kind of get things into a different space and have gate fees increase, and what are all the different braided operative money sources we can find, what would that kind of look like too?
So I'm hearing from this collective that we should probably look at reinstituting some sort of fee base, and based on the information that we've gathered here, we could develop a model where we review both everything from ticket sales to ASB to then adding on a assessed fee that is manageable for families so that we don't restrict access or block barriers to access. And also we don't want to lose sight of our equity lens as we do this as well. So I think it's important for us to continue to explore ways to remove barriers for students and encourage participation, whatever they may be. If they're not financial, then we need to find those and explore them as well. So we'll do both.
All right. Any last thoughts? All right. With that, I will adjourn this work session at 6:01 p.m.